Imagine waiting your entire life for something you were promised, something you believed in, even when it made no sense. That was the life of Abraham. He was not a king. He was not surrounded by luxury. He was simply a man who listened and obeyed. A man who had learned to trust a voice he could not see but knew was real. Many years before the moment that would define his life, Abraham had been called by God to leave everything he knew behind. His home, his land, his people, everything familiar. And without knowing where he was going, he followed. Time passed. Days turned into years, and years into decades. Abraham grew older, and so did his wife, Sarah. Their bodies weakened with age, but one thing never came, the child they had always longed for. And yet, in the middle of that silence, God had made a promise. A promise that sounded impossible. That Abraham would become the father of many nations. But how could that be? How could a man with no child become the father of nations? How could a woman far beyond her years suddenly give birth? It didn't make sense. But Abraham believed anyway. He held on to that promise, even when everything around him suggested it would never happen. And then, when all hope seemed gone, when time had already written its final conclusion, the impossible happened.
Oh, my
Sarah
sweet
conceived,
Isaac.
and she gave birth
love
to
you
a
so
son.
much, little one.
They named him
Welcome
Isaac.
to the world, my
Laughter
precious
returned to
baby.
their home.
Sleep
Not
now, my
just the
darling.
laughter of joy,
My
but the
son, my
laughter of
Isaac.
disbelief,
Such
the
a
kind
miracle
that
you
comes
are.
when something so
will
impossible
cherish and
suddenly
protect you
becomes
always.
real. Isaac was not just a child.
My
He was the
son, my
promise.
Isaac.
He was
You are the
everything
light of my
Abraham
old
had
age.
waited for.
I have waited so
Every
long
moment
for you.
spent with him felt like a
will
miracle.
always protect you.
Every step Isaac took, every word he spoke, reminded Abraham that God had kept his word. Years passed, and the
Father,
bond
this
between
desert is
father
so
and son
vast.
grew
Yes,
stronger.
Isaac.
It shows us how small
Abraham
we
watched
are.
Isaac grow,
Look,
from
are
a
those
child
mountains?
into a
They
young
are.
boy
A
full
long
of
journey
life,
ahead. Isaac,
curiosity,
see this
and
passage?
trust.
It speaks of faith
They
and
walked
promises.
together.
Father. It
They
looks
talked
important.
together.
It is.
They
These
shared
words are for you to
quiet
carry
moments
forward.
that
I will,
only a
Father, I
father and
promise.
son could understand. And for a time, everything was at peace. Until one night. In the stillness, when the world was quiet and the stars filled the sky, the voice came again. Clear, direct, unmistakable. God spoke. But this time, the message was different. There was no comfort in it. No joy. Only a command that would shake the very core of Abraham's being. He was told to take Isaac, his only son, the one he loved so deeply, and offer him as a sacrifice. For a moment, everything must have gone silent inside him. The promise, the miracle, the child he had waited his entire life for. Now being asked back, not just given up, but sacrificed. There was no explanation, no reason, no reassurance, just a command. And yet, the story does not tell us that Abraham argued. It does not tell us that he questioned or resisted. Instead, something even more difficult happened. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Abraham got up. Quietly, he prepared the wood. He gathered what was needed. His movements were steady, but the weight in his heart must have been unbearable. Then
Isaac,
he
my
called
son.
Isaac,
Yes,
and
Father?
together, they
Come
began the
closer, my
journey.
boy.
It was
I'm
not a
here.
short journey. For
I
3
love you,
days,
Isaac.
they walked. 3 long days. Days filled with silence, with thoughts that could not be spoken, with emotions too heavy for words. Every step brought Abraham closer
Path
to
is
the
long,
moment he
my
could
son,
not
but we
escape.
walk it together.
Every glance at
trust
his
you,
son
Father,
must have
but my
pierced his
feet grow
heart.
weary.
Isaac
Rest your
walked
heart.
beside
Our
him,
journey has
unaware
purpose.
of what was
I feel
coming,
it.
trusting his
Father,
father
you are so
completely.
strong and wise.
There
I
were
want to
no
be like
signs of
You are
turning
already
back.
strong, my son.
No
Just follow your heart.
hesitation in
you. I will,
Abraham's
Father.
actions.
I promise.
Only
I
a
know you
quiet
will.
determination,
God will provide.
rooted in something deeper than understanding. Finally, on the 3rd day, they arrived. The place had been shown to Abraham. A quiet mountain, still, isolated. There, he stopped. He told the servants to remain behind while he and Isaac went further. And as they continued alone, Isaac began to notice something. He saw the wood. He saw the fire. But something was missing. Something important. He turned to his father, his voice innocent and sincere. He asked where the lamb for the sacrifice was. It was a simple question, but one that must have struck Abraham deeply. For a moment, time must have stood still. And then
God will
Abraham
provide.
answered, not with panic, not with uncertainty, but with quiet faith. He said that God would provide. And they continued walking. When they reached the exact place, Abraham began to build the altar. Stone by stone, carefully placed. Every movement slow, deliberate. He arranged the wood, and then, he turned to Isaac. At some point, Isaac must have understood. There was no lamb. There was no other offering. He was the offering. And yet, there is no struggle recorded. No resistance. Only trust. Trust in his father. And perhaps, in the same God his father trusted.
Isaac, my
Abraham
son,
gently
it must
bound
be this
him,
way.
and placed him
trust
on
you,
the
Father.
altar.
You are
The
brave,
moment
my
had
beloved
come.
son.
The air must have felt heavy. The silence overwhelming. Abraham stood there, looking at his son. Then, slowly, he reached for the knife. He lifted it. Time seemed to freeze. Everything hung in that moment. And just as the act was about to be completed, a voice called out, sharp, urgent, from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. He stopped immediately. Every movement halted. The voice spoke again, telling
this
him
vision?
not to harm the boy, not to lay a hand
cannot
on
be.
him. And in that instant, everything changed. The tension broke. The weight lifted. Relief rushed in like a flood. Abraham looked up, and there, caught in a nearby bush, was a ram. It had been there all along. The provision, the answer. God had provided, just as Abraham had said. The ram became the sacrifice
ram?
instead.
In the thicket.
Isaac was safe.
The Lord
And in
has
that
provided.
moment, the
I
truth
see now.
became clear.
Thank you.
This had never been about taking Isaac. It had been about testing something far deeper. Abraham's
Lord, my
faith,
horror
his
and gratitude.
willingness to trust,
I
even
praise
when
you,
nothing
for my
made
Ephesians
sense,
brothers, that you, my
even
fat
when
was
it
filled with
cost him
joy.
everything. And
Thank you.
because he did not hold back, because he was willing to give up what he loved most. The promise was reaffirmed, stronger than before, that his descendants would be countless, like the stars in the sky. And as Abraham stood there, looking at his son, alive,
That was
safe,
close.
breathing,
I feel
he understood
much better
something
now.
that few ever truly grasp.
Safe at last.
That sometimes, life
It's
will bring
beautiful,
you to
isn't it?
moments where
It
everything
is.
feels
I feel safe here with
uncertain,
you.
where the path
Always.
ahead makes no sense,
walk and enjoy
where
this
what you are
peace.
asked to do
Okay.
feels impossible.
Isaac, my
But in
boy,
those
stay close by my
moments,
side.
provision
I
often
will,
comes at the
grandfather.
very last second.
See the hills?
Not
They hold
early,
many wonders.
not when you
It's
expect
beautiful.
it, but right when you need it most. And that is what makes faith so
Look, my
powerful.
son, the stars
Because
guide
it is
us.
not about
so
understanding
beautiful,
every
Father.
step.
Each one
It is
a
about
story,
trusting,
I wanna
even
hear
when
them
you
all.
don't.
and you will.